You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The views expressed by the individuals during this broadcast are their own opinions, and they may not be the same as those of their group or other organizations they may be involved with.
All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
Hello, everyone. I would like to thank you for joining us today. We have a very special guest with us, Mr. Carl Olsen. And for those who are not aware of who Mr. Olsen is, we are going to spend our time educating you about his works and deeds, because he is someone that many of us have come to follow due to the methods and methodologies he has been working towards over the decades in the wonderful state of Iowa. So we are very honored today to be joined by Mr. Olsen in Iowa, an Iowan legend, an American legend as far as we're concerned, as we basically want to just discuss a lot of the history that Carl has been around. We want to expose veterans and other activists to those of us who we look up to, those that we have worked alongside or we have watched from afar. I was very honored back in '94 to travel through with the Cannabis Action Network to the state of Iowa to meet Carl in person and be interviewed at a local high school there, which was quite eye-opening and fascinating to see how well educated the youth in Iowa were on hemp and cannabis, as well as to see the hard work and dedication that Carl was continuing to bring to fruition there. So without further ado, Carl, thank you for joining us today. Very simple question. How did you originally come to cannabis?
I believe that I saw a movie in high school or somewhere in there called Assassin of Youth, and it was so overblown that it tweaked my interest in cannabis. And so, and then it just seemed like coincidentally I would run into people that were using it. And so those two things came together and I tried it, and I was like, I was just thinking that the way they brainwash people to hate certain minority groups just flashed into my head, and it just made me extremely depressed or whatever. Just, I mean, the psychological impact that it had on me was just mind-blowing. I just thought the government knew that they were intentionally lying about this. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but that's how I felt about it at the time. Like, this wasn't an accident, that it was very intentional and very evil. So that's how I originally came to cannabis. And then after a while, I started thinking I was having like a religious experience. And so I started looking for other people that were looking at it that way. And so I found them. and I ended up joining a group called they were involved with the Jamaicans, with the Rastafarians. And so that was what I got involved in, because they saw cannabis as a sacrament, and the true sacrament, not the wine symbolic sacrament, but the real thing, something that you use all the time and in congregation, and it increases the spiritual experience that you have when you're involved in an activity with other people. So that's that's how that happened. And then we got arrested over and over again. And, our cases were widely publicized. We were on 60 Minutes in 1979 in a segment called Holy Smoke by Dan Rather. And my case, and then I filed with an application with the DEA for a religious exemption, like the exemption for peyote. And that case went to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1990. And if you read any case about sacramental use of controlled substances, you'll see my case cited as a leading authority by why you have to be put down.
That's an interesting way of putting it, but yes,
Yeah.
for sure. But what you're talking about is you're talking about your original 20-ton bust, or well, I guess the first one you were able to get through, but the second one, I guess, was the one.
Well, my first state arrest was 120 pounds, and then my federal arrest was 20 tons. The 120 pounds, I was found, in a car with 120 pounds of marijuana. The 20-ton bust was a couple dozen people on a remote island in Maine, Deer Isle in Maine, near Bangor.
Wow.
And so, yeah.
No,
Hey, Carl.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tom Riley.
Yeah. How you doing, Al?
Tom Riley. I'm doing great, man.
Tom
Tell
Riley.
these guys.
You knew Tom? Did you, or you just know about him?
No, I went to high school with him.
Oh my God!
We were in the same graduating class. There was only 42 of us. Oh yeah, man! I knew him from the get-go.
Holy cow!
And he went to Seton Hall. And the next time I saw him is what you were talking about, that Dan Rather interview on whatever the hell it was. And there he was in Miami Tell these guys about this. Tell them.
Well, he came to Iowa and testified in my case and said I was a member of the Ethiopian Zion Coptic Church. So he was one of my main witnesses. He actually came to Iowa and took the witness stand. And so did Melanie Dreher. You know Melanie. Melanie lived with us down in Jamaica at Star Island, and then so she testified at my trial too, saying that it was a legitimate religion. Of course, by then the Florida Supreme Court had already said it was a bona fide religion, centuries old, and regularly used cannabis as its sacrament. So, but Melanie and Tom Riley were awesome expert witnesses at my trial. So, and of course, I was found guilty of possessing the sacrament, and which I claimed to be my own, and went to prison for that. And I don't know how long Tom did in prison, but probably longer than I did.
And in prison, you started to self-educate yourself and started to read and then apply, correct?
No, I did that at Star Island in 1979 or something like that. I moved to Star Island in Miami, and I went to prison in 1984. So between 79 and 84, the church headquarters there, we lived in a commune. They bought me law books, and I started reading the Bureau of National Affairs weekly law reports, and got a subscription to the Southern Reporters, the Northwest or the Southern Reporter West publication, and U.S. Code annotated, Florida statutes annotated, and just started reading every kind of thing I could get my hands on, legal stuff. So I did that for 5 years, and the guy that ran the Dade County Law Library noticed my interest and started helping me with learn how to do legal research. So by the time I got to prison, I was already pretty well legally educated and already had a case pending with the DEA. And then while I was in prison, I got locked up with my co-defendants, which was just amazing. And we got along well with the prison's guards, and so they made me the head of the law library. So I ran the law library while I was in prison. Then when I got out, I got a paralegal degree and started working for the state government in the Department of Transportation. I did that for 13 years. And that's probably what I was doing when you met me. That would have been about the time the Cannabis Action Network was trekking through Iowa. And I met Jack Harrer and Chris Conrad. They were doing the hemp tour, and they came to Iowa. And then I became the state coordinator for Normal from 2002 to 2012. And then I started this Iowans for Medical Marijuana thing with George McMahon and Barbara Douglas so that we could, well, you know, the Raich case in 2005 said there was no argument for medical use. And so we had a Supreme Court ruling in Iowa where they said the medical necessity defense wasn't available because the legislature had already determined that Schedule I means no medical use. And so medical necessity wasn't an open question. So they said, and if that wasn't true, the Board of Pharmacy would let us know. So I got a hold of Al Byrne here, and we decided we were going to challenge the Board of Pharmacy, and we pulled it off. In 2009, they ruled, or 2010, they said it was medicine based on a whole ton of expert witnesses that Al and Mary Lynn got together, and Normal provided a couple, and so did Marijuana Policy Project. So, but it was a show. We had 4 public hearings in 4 cities, 8 hours each of testimony from all over the planet, and doctors from everywhere, and it was just overwhelming. And they were all transcribed. I still have the transcripts of every one of those, all 4 8-hour hearings, and yeah, it was amazing. So, thank you, Al.
Yeah. Well, this is how we come to move things. It's quite amazing as also how small the world is to realize that his high school buddy that y'all would be involved in, and in the end,
that's
Al
incredible.
would be working together. It just makes this world a little bit smaller sometimes.
Well, see, that's why I think all this is spiritual. I mean, there's just something weird about it that just seems magical. It's like, I don't know how the hell this stuff happens, but yeah, we're all drawn together about like a magnet, so.
Yeah, and
well, Riley was hard to miss, by the way. He was 6'8" or 6'9". I mean, he was the center of our high school basketball team. And so if you put him in a lineup with a bunch of other guys, he was definitely going to be taller than everybody else.
Yeah.
The last I heard of him was that, Carl, that when he got out of the prison system, which I think was Florida, he was finally released where he could leave the country. Yep. I believe he went to the Netherlands.
Yep.
He got married.
He got married before. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, okay. They were a couple. I don't know when they got married, but they were a couple when I knew him.
Okay.
His wife is Cordelia. Yeah, he had a son. He had a son. Yeah. I don't know what happened to, I know I've talked to Cordelia a couple of times. Like, I think I talked to her about a year ago. We all got together for a funeral for Jim Tramner's wife died about a year ago, and she organized a Zoom thing where we all got together and met, and she invited me to that. So.
Well, I'm in a Zoom meeting quite frequently during the month with a lot of, we only had 42 guys in our class. 8 of them served in the Vietnam War out of that number, which I think is rather extraordinary. Tom, we were always wondering what happened to Riley. As you're explaining it to me, he went to the Netherlands. He had his lady, he had a child, and he died there. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think he had some kind of a blood cancer or some kind of blood thing. I mean, he was always frail, and so he went to the Netherlands because the cannabis was freely available there, and the federal convictions and all that stuff wouldn't haunt him there, and so yeah.
Well, thank you for updating me. I'll tell my classmates that I talked to you. I saw that show by on national TV, and it was. I think the thing that screwed you guys up on that show, Carl, correct me if I'm wrong, but everything seemed to be going pretty well with the interview with Riley and Rather and all that, and then they showed a few shots of young people, children, 10 years old, 12 years old, hitting on joints. And I think at that point, the American society at that time, you know, we're back here in the late 60s, we're talking about. That just turned everybody off, Carl. Do you think that's true or not?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that wasn't, in Miami, the news media used to come over and film kids smoking marijuana. That wasn't the only, I mean, that was a regular thing. That wasn't like just a fluke or anything. That was the real deal.
It
You know,
was
we couldn't hide. We got arrested over and over again, and the media wanted to know what the hell was going on. We let them in and showed them what was going on. That was all real. I mean, there wasn't any fake or doctoring or changing anything or creating appearances or putting on an act. We just gave them the real deal. You know.
What did they arrest you for?
Huh?
What did they arrest you for?
I got arrested in Iowa for 120 pounds, and when they got me on the witness stand, they asked me some kind of question, and I said it was good for the young, good for the old, and good for the baby 1 day old. They didn't ask me if I had kids or if I gave it to kids. They said, based on that testimony, that I gave it to kids, which I didn't do. But
they
my
painted
beliefs
you that way, and once you were
well,
painted
my
that
beliefs
way,
were that it was good for kids, but I'm not going to give it to your kid. If I had kids, I would have I didn't have kids because I felt like the government would indoctrinate them against me and they would raise them up to be snitches. And I mean, I don't have kids and I don't have a family, and you know, I trust no one.
Pearson, you had a response.
Yes, Carl, thanks for coming on with us. Incredible. I'm not sure if you're aware of the Colette raids, 1992 up here in Alaska. The feds came up and did a multi-prong cannabis sting. DEA came up, Blackhawks, everything like that, and we ended up. I mean, I wasn't up here, but John Collette, the so-called ringleader, got his place raided. He had to grow underneath a rose garden that was I guess kind of like a Connex box. But he got charged federally, and then the state after he actually fled and got brought back here, the Supreme Court in Alaska found that it was a breach of our Ninth Amendment right to privacy, and he is actually a licensed cannabis cultivator to this day. And he had been charged with, I believe, 10 years in federal prison, and actually fled and got off on it. Now has a license, legal cannabis license up here in Fairbanks, along with TSA allowing for going outside their means and working on things that aren't as dangerous as bombs and stuff, just to hold up otherwise nonviolent consumers. I just want to say thank you for your courage of bringing this plan into the communities and helping.
Yeah, my reaction when I started using it was that the world was at war and violent. that cannabis made people peaceful. And so I thought by distributing as much as I could, that I would be bringing out a change in the way people think, and that they would become more peaceful and friendly. And so that was my thinking about it, was to spread cannabis far and wide. Now, I didn't live in Alaska, so Alaska was famous for Raven versus State, you know. So Alaska's always been progressive, if you want to call it, on this issue. Yep.
Absolutely. We're a red state, and I haven't met a Republican up here that would go against it. Oh, never mind. That was misleading. Yes, I have. Republican.
But it is different, though. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, your what was the name of didn't you have a senator that just died or something, Young or something?
Don Young.
Don Young.
Don
yeah.
Young. He's the longest federal House representatives. He was a senior or the dean of the House, and he had been in for decades, and he has always been with veterans and cannabis, and he had a bill going that we were really following, where you wouldn't lose your Second Amendment rights because you are a consumer of cannabis, and unfortunately he passed away recently. And I always enjoyed speaking with him loudly in town halls. He was a good guy.
Yeah. Cool.
Well,
Hey, Carl. Raven, interesting you bring that up. I was on the board of Normal, and the lawyers for that cause came to DC, and we had some money then, believe it or not. We ended up $50,000 for that particular case in Alaska. But I always thought, and I don't know if this ever influenced your thought, but I thought that when Alaska legalized the use of cannabis, even publicly, you could go into a bar up there and light up a joint. Nobody gave a shit. And that went on for like 20 years. I might be off a few. And then nothing happened. Nothing bad happened in 20 years. You know, it wasn't like axe murders increased by 100% or something. The only thing that changed that huh?
I said it wasn't the assassin of youth.
Exactly. Yeah. But anyway, did any of that Alaskan law? Did any of that Alaskan law influence how you approach law in Iowa?
Oh, only as far as a encouragement, or I mean, it just a bright spot, and not particularly. No. I mean, it just created that, like, you know, okay, this can happen. You know, I mean, like, don't give up. There's hope. You know, that was how I looked at it. I didn't really.
Yeah, Alaska was always that kind of a lighthouse off in the distance with a bright light kind of circling every once in a while. You're like, oh yeah, it happened over there. It's a possibility.
Yeah. Must have been the vodka or something. I don't know.
Yeah, except in the winter.
Right.
Yeah.
Where that's the only time you can see the lighthouse.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Mhm.
All right, our next question is going to be from Tony Landry, Councilmember Landry.
Thank you, ATN. Thank you, Carl, for being here. I think we chatted a little bit. You like growing hot peppers and stuff?
That's me. Yeah.
Yeah, we chatted before on Facebook.
Yeah.
I'm talking to you from deep South Louisiana in Cajun country, Lafayette, Louisiana, and we eat a lot of hot peppers down here. So
Yeah.
connection there. Okay, I have a question for you. I don't know anything about Rastafarianism, and this question says, I'm going to learn something here.
Okay.
It says, could you please explain the connection between Rastafarianism and cannabis beliefs?
Well, Rastafari is a big deal in the Caribbean, not just Jamaica, but all over the Caribbean. And it is a religion that uses cannabis as its sacrament and traces that back through Africa and India. During the slave trade, the Europeans enslaved Africans and Chinese and Indians. And so the name ganja comes from India, and the religion comes from Africa. Rastafari is Prince of Peace, or it's a biblical term, but it's an African term, but it means the same thing. It comes from Christianity that split off from like the Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church split. The Eastern Orthodox Church filtered down through Africa. The country of Egypt was called Coptic, and the language was Coptic. The entire continent was called Ethiopia at one time. And the Coptic religion spread down to Ethiopia in the 7th century, and then the chain of emperors in Ethiopia, it was a theocracy. They claimed direct descendancy from the Solomon and Sheba. Sheba was from Africa, and so they have this whole genealogy thing. And there's a Ethiopian Tawahedo church, and they split and schismed. And when the Marxists took over, it's no longer a theocracy, and now the original version of that Ethiopian Rastafarian thing is headed in Jamaica. They have a pope in Jamaica and another one in Ethiopia, and there's a schism between the two. So they don't use cannabis as a sacrament, but the Rastafarians do, okay? And so Bob Marley, just before he died, converted to this religion that doesn't use cannabis as a sacrament. But they do believe Rastafari is God, and they worship a person, okay? And that person's dead now. So it would be kind of like Jesus or something or whatever. So my religion believes that Christ is a collective, and that we are, when you're looking at someone else, you're looking at God face to face, that God lives in us, and collectively we are God. So but we called ourselves Rastafarians. I didn't know there was these, when I first heard about Rastafari, that's how I heard about it. I didn't know that there was people that believed a person was God, or that it came from Ethiopia or Africa. I didn't know any of that. I found out about it later. But so I don't know of any other religion that's that big. I mean, the country of Jamaica in 2015 actually nationalized Rastafari as a cannabis religion in their drug law. So there's nothing like it on the planet. And if you go down and meet with those people, you will feel comfortable, like you're with your own. And so that's what happened to me. I enjoyed being around those people because they weren't crazy brainwashed about marijuana, and they believed that all kinds of other herbs had healing properties, and they avoided processed foods and chemicals. And so it wasn't just the marijuana. It was like, marijuana is a natural plant. You need good, clean soil, good, clean air, good, clean water. And you need that for everything else that promotes life. So that's the connection.
Thank you for that, Carl.
Thank you, Carl.
Yeah.
No, that was absolutely wonderful. Our next question will go to Council Member Wade Laughter.
Yeah, Carl, really deep respect for you and some of the choices you've made in your life. I'm particularly struck by your description of your relationship to the plant and how you came to it as a sacrament. And I just want to note, with respect for your previous work with the Coptic Church and establishing the right to use cannabis as a religious sacrament, you personally have given up your own personal religious use of cannabis due to a belief in changing the laws. Can you kind of build a bridge between that activist who saw it as a sacrament and now has had to make a choice to pass on
sure.
use for yourself? Thank you,
Absolutely,
Carl.
yeah.
This is a fascinating conversation, by the way. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a critical thing to my whole everything I do. Yeah. So in all of my cases, I argued that my religious use of cannabis, and not just me, all these other people like Tom Riley and all the other people that were involved in the church. You know, Ramsey Clark was our attorney, former attorney general under Lyndon Johnson, and on the normal board of directors. And we made the argument that we were protected by the First Amendment, and the argument was no harm, no foul. Okay, where are the bodies? You know, sure, the children on TV smoking cannabis, where are they now? They're productive citizens working. They're just regular people. Nothing happened to them. So our argument was no harm, no foul. And so when we went to the Supreme Court, while my case was pending, when I went to the Supreme Court, all the other people had dropped off by then. I had this petition with the DEA to create an exemption like the one for peyote. All the other people had given up, lost their appeals. And I was the only one carrying this thing from a civil perspective. So all these cases were criminal cases, so I created the civil case with the DEA to apply for an exemption. So I'm not the defendant, I'm suing them. And so when that went to the US Supreme Court, they had a case called Employment Division versus Smith about a Native American in Oregon that was fired from his job for using, as a drug counselor, for using peyote. And the argument was that that was protected by the First Amendment to the US Constitution. And of course, they had a sacramental exemption in the federal regulations. So the argument was, hey, this really is religious. The federal government recognizes it. The ruling in that case was that as long as the Oregon drug law was neutral toward religion and generally applicable. So Oregon drug law did not have any exceptions for religion or unauthorized for non-prescription use of controlled substances, no exceptions. The Supreme Court said in that case, they were not going to bludgeon the state of Oregon with the First Amendment, and they weren't going to apply the First Amendment. And in all of my cases, I had made the argument that I should have equal protection because Iowa had a peyote exemption. Unlike Oregon, Iowa has always had this religious exemption for peyote, and the federal government has always had the religious exemption. So unlike Oregon, I was living in places that did have religious exceptions. And so I said the law is not neutral toward religion, it's not operationally neutral toward religion, and it is not generally applicable. And the courts all agreed with me and said, okay, we're going to apply something called strict scrutiny, the compelling interest test. And they said, your use of marijuana is not like the use of peyote because they're not the same substance. The use of peyote is limited and your use is unlimited. The way that you use it is constantly, all the time, everywhere. Marijuana is in high demand and peyote is not. And peyote is obtained legally in Texas, and the Texas peyote suppliers are licensed under Texas law and federal law. And I had no way of saying where I was going to get marijuana legally. There were no legal sources in the United States. So I said, the federal government should give me a canister with 300 cigarettes in it with a prescription to smoke 10 a month, or 10 a day, like the patients had on the compassionate use program. And they said, no, we're not going to make a religious exemption where we supply you with free marijuana. And so I lost based on that. So at that point, I knew that the Constitution doesn't get up and walk around and enforce itself. It's whatever the US Supreme Court says it is. At that point, I no longer had an argument that what I was doing was legal. It was toast. And so I stopped using marijuana because I couldn't afford to get 3 strikes and you're out. And I had no legal defense, no credible argument. So I said, I'm going to wait until the law's not generally applicable, but I'm going to use marijuana as my equal protection argument the next time I come back. Well, Iowa did that in 2017, And my lawyer just filed our reply brief in court today, and we're litigating that in Iowa District Court. And I have a petition pending with the DEA for the same thing, saying that now there's a legal source where I can get it. And the other thing is that this manufacturer in Iowa called MedFarm, they just got a DEA license for bulk manufacturing. So that means they have a federal license to grow marijuana. So I could say there's actually a place that's legal under both state and federal law where I could get the marijuana from, and they will sell it to me because they sell marijuana. I wouldn't be asking for a free handout. I would be willing to buy it. So that's why I quit using marijuana 32 years ago. And I made that sacrifice because there was no other intelligent thing to do. If I wanted to stay involved in the legal fight, I had to have a legal argument. And so to make the whole thing, and another thing is, like, the state set up this illegal program to distribute cannabis. They've got a federally criminal enterprise running this thing in Iowa, growing the marijuana. And they got a federal license now to grow bulk marijuana for the DEA, but that doesn't apply to what they're doing in Iowa. They're violating federal drug law every day. So I was able to use that and go to the board that regulates the program and say, well, I had declarations from Iowa legislators saying that we just violated federal law. We're violating federal law in the newspaper, on the TV. And I gave that to the board and said, are we? And they looked at me like, you're not supposed to ask that question. Of course we are. And so I said, if there was something we could do to fix that, should we? And they said, yeah. And I said, well, hey, there's an exemption we could get. Peyote's got one. There's no way the government could say we don't qualify. We got this well-controlled program here with no diversion, no adverse health impact. We should qualify for an exemption. That's safer than the peyote exemption, for God's sake. And they said, okay, let's do that. So then they backed out of it. They wanted the legislature to enact that into a law. And so the legislature said, we're going to apply for federal funding guarantees. Then the Department of Public Health said the only way to get federal funding guarantees is to apply for this exemption Olsen is talking about. And then they didn't do anything. So I had to sue them for mandamus to file the damn thing. So they filed for federal funding guarantees, and I filed that with the DEA saying, wait a minute. And I attached the document where they said federal exemption was the only way to get the federal funding guarantees, and said, they know they need a federal exemption and you know you can give them one. That's what this is about. This is not about federal funding guarantees. We need an exemption from federal drug law to make the whole thing legal. And so that's what I was able to do by saying, I'm not breaking the law. Why should you? Like, didn't you ding me my whole entire life for breaking the law? And now it's just okay for everybody to break the law? When did that happen?
I got to say, Carl, I have such deep respect for your commitment to making change in the law. I have a justice boner. I'm going to lean back and just enjoy it. Thank you.
I could see it. I could see this whole thing in my head, and that's what keeps you going, is to be able to visualize the thing and see it. That makes it easier to make the sacrifice because you know the payoff is there. The only thing is to live long enough to get there, you know. And like I'm feeling pretty good, you know. I'm 70 years old and I don't feel bad, you know. So I'm going to live long enough to see it.
Well, and we're going to keep working at it hard enough so that you can see it in your lifetime. So we're going to do our part in September for our lobby day as we go up and kick them in the proverbial mental nuts and see how they respond and move on from there. Because yeah, we want to actually have the program completely redone. After talking to Alice Randall, who joined us on a previous one, and she warned us because we wanted to reopen the Compassion IND program for veterans and veterans access, and she told us, no, don't do that. You know, actually create and have them create a new system outright, because we don't want that crappy hemp grade cannabis that they grow in Mississippi and dry on plastic in the sun compared to the quality cannabis that we sell over the counter every day in California, Washington, Oregon, etc. So it's
Well, that's
just
another thing. The DEA was just completely routed by the U.S. Department of Justice in 2018 for running an illegal pot farm in Mississippi for 50 years and in violation of the international treaty and federal drug law. And so these are the kind of things that I store in my tool chest because I'm not violating any drug laws. And so when they start getting picky with me and saying, oh, well, you're dirty, we can't work with you and all, I'm going, hey, pot calling the kettle black here, come on. Like, you're not clean. Like, how can you tell me I'm unworthy? Like, Jesus.
And the irony is this you'll find in that we giggle at is, of course, now since of course Michael Krowitz was part of the group that helped change international law, which has of course changed the treaty status, or at least our hand in it, and we're trying to get hold of the USAG's office to, or much less get the media to notice that we're currently out of sync now with international laws and treaty, and somehow no one in the media wants to talk to us, and no response back. So we're probably gonna have to do our own FOIA request, or to find out what is actually happening there.
We are people advocating cannabis education here at paceradio.net.
Limestone City Hydroponics is Kingston, Ontario's hydroponics shop. Take your growing to the next level and create the optimal environment with a tent kit, or maximize your yield with an ebb and flow flood table kit. Either way, Limestone City Hydroponics has more sizes and options to fit your needs. Are you looking for the power of the sun that adapts to your budget? Then look no further, as they have professional grow lighting. They have indoor grow systems that are easy and cost effective, with many options to fit your living space and lifestyle. Cultivate your growing potential. We have everything you need to succeed. And if you can't make it to the store, they offer local delivery to the greater Kingston area. Remember, when you're looking for experts to help you grow, then look no further than the locally owned Limestone City Hydroponics, 105 Sunderland Drive in Kingston, Ontario. Call them at 613-548-0420.
Enjoy the buzz of legalization with Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. From lights to plant nutrients, books, consumption accessories, and more, we've got all your basics to grow or consume cannabis. Visit our info center or take a look at our piercing services and body jewelry, now available in-store through Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, 17 Bridge Street West, Campbellford.
Are you looking to get your medical cannabis grow license? Limestone City Hydroponics can help patients through the process of obtaining their license to grow medical cannabis. What's that? You don't have a doctor? If you meet the medical criteria, Limestone City Hydroponics has a nurse practitioner who can assess and provide medical cannabis prescriptions. What are you waiting for? Contact Limestone City Hydroponics at limestonecityhydroponics.ca or call them at 613-548-0420.
PACE Radio is the People Advocating Cannabis Education Radio Network.
Legacy 420 have an awesome array of cannabis-infused beverages, from pop to Nature's Nectar's teas, all in amazing flavors. What a selection! We even have a delicious mango-infused juice, and let me tell you, it's delicious.
Everything is infused in-house, so we buy our syrup from the same place where everybody else buys their syrup for their pop, and the infusion is done in the lab. It's all canned here, labeled here, produced 100% on Tyndonega.
We have two lines of drinks. One is called our Nature's Nectar. That was our original line that we came out with, and then we also have a line under the Red E brand. We have them in 10 milligrams, 30 milligram, and 60 milligram cans.
What a great selection for a get-together with friends or after a long day. Remember, if you want to wet your whistle with on-site lab-tested products, come see your trusted partner. Legacy 420 out on your road.
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
I read that high compliance thing that Michael knows about.
Well, that's
and of course, the UN rescheduled cannabis in December of 2020, saying, "Oh, it has medical use." So of course, that should have a ripple effect. Yes.
And thus making the cannabis farm in Mississippi finally legal.
Yeah, I don't know how that. Yeah, I assume that they fixed all the problems with that, and of course they licensed Med Farm here in Iowa to do the same thing as the Mississippi pot farm because they can't keep up with the demand, and the quality of the marijuana they grow is not. They want more variety, and so they licensed Dr. Sicily in where's she from? Arizona or New Mexico? I can't remember, but anyway, she does the PTS studies.
Arizona.
PTSD.
Yep, Arizona.
Yep.
Well, that leads us to, right to Michael Krawitz, who is going to ask our next question because it leads and kind of stacks on what we're just talking about. Michael Krawitz.
Thanks, Etienne. It's great to see you, Carl, and thank you so much for sharing some time with us. The question is really short, so I'm going to actually make it a little longer. How can a state use exemption to remove itself from federal law? The thing about your work on exemption that I find fascinating is my work on international stuff really revolved around one sentence in our Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, and one little paragraph in the Controlled Substances Act. And when you were saying something along the lines of, when they send us back from the court saying that we haven't exhausted all our non-judicial, administrative remedies, these are the remedies they're talking about, these little paragraphs in the CSA. And what baffles me is that you could be working on this little paragraph in the CSA and that the movement for the last 50 years or 60 years with all these legal eyes has missed it. And also,
21 USC 822D. Yeah.
And I also want you to tell us, if you could, wrap up a little bit about where this work is. Like, how many states have put in
okay, good. Yeah.
proper applications, where those applications.
A friend of mine wanted that question to be asked and wanted me to answer that question. So that's good. I have a friend in Hawaii who's a doctor, and he's been working on this. And so anyway, yeah, Hawaii passed a resolution, unanimous in the House and Senate, to have their Department of Health investigate this exemption argument. And the Department of Health in Hawaii responded by saying, we're ashamed of our state and we don't want to draw any attention to ourselves, so we're not doing it, because it didn't have any mandate that the department do anything. It simply told them to check it out. So they checked it out and said, we're too ashamed to even bring this up, so we're not going to do anything. So now they're stuck, and they're going to have to get a law and signed by their governor to force the state to apply. But it did get passed unanimous in the House and Senate. In Minnesota, it went quite a ways in their health bill last year and this year, but it didn't make the final cut. But it was kicked around by the bill to apply for the exemption was introduced by the two co-chairs of their medical cannabis board, who are legislators. They have a different kind of a composition board than what we have here in Iowa. Our board here in Iowa is strictly medical professionals, and my experience working with Al with the pharmacy board here led me to believe that that was the best audience that I could find, is medical professionals. And so I went to them feeling confident that medical professionals would understand what I'm talking about, because they know about red tape and federal regulations, and especially people that are really deep into the medical profession. And sure enough, they understood it right away, and they agreed with me. One of them gave me $100 to help sue the governor last year. And that's the one that contacted you, Al, and said he wants to join your group. So I'm hijacking the medical board. I mean, the board that regulates our cannabis program here is co-petitioners and activists. Yeah.
Well, hijack accordingly.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was Michael's question about if other states have picked up on this. So yeah, 2 states have picked up on it, but I know people really well in those 2 states. Like the doctor in Hawaii, his attorney is the son of one of the people in this Coptic church. So like, isn't that a coincidence? And And the guy in Minnesota, he gave me, like, him and Randy Quaid, who was the chair of the normal board, gave me $2,000 back in 2013 to file a separate appeal in the case Michael was in, our scheduling case that we had, the Coalition for Cannabis Scheduling. I tried to argue that state law was accepted medical use, that you couldn't get any more accepted than a state law, that medical opinion was nowhere near as significant as a state law. That establishes medical use beyond any reasonable doubt. And so that was the argument I made in Michael's case, but I made it in 2010, and we all filed that in 2002. And so by the time I was bringing this argument into it, the DEA had already gotten the decision from the FDA, and the case, I was too late to make that argument. But anyway, so the guy in Minnesota has been working with me for a long time, and the one in Hawaii. So
Michael, I had a follow-up for you there, Carl.
Yep.
At least one, I guess, but it just surprises me, I guess, that well, first let me do some cleanup. When you're talking about the International Drug Control Treaty and the U.S. Compliance, it had to do with really something rather mundane. Within the treaty, each country that has cannabis as a medicine, whatever, is supposed to designate one governmental office to oversee that. And we had those responsibilities shared between NIDA and DEA and the Mississippi Farm, all over the place. Exactly the reason that the treaty asks is why, this is a bad idea, because in the US, it is quite dyslexic when you're trying to talk to the program. There is no program, right? And that's the out of compliance part, the major out of compliance part. Also, the DEA was arguing with the State Department, because the State Department, like every other country, read the treaty and said, well, of course the government can have a non-governmental entity, a contract grower or whatever, doesn't have to grow all the weed, but yet the DEA was saying the opposite and even arguing it in court. It's quite dyslexic. But my question is this, I mean, states, really, it strikes me, we see the passing of the buck at the national level, like where the executive branch says, oh, the Congress should do it. Congress says the executive branch should do it, back and forth. We've seen that, especially with scheduling. But I guess it's a little more hidden, but I see it in your work and at the state level at this passing of the buck, because here the states are essentially hoping that the feds do something, when in reality they still may have medical marijuana in their state, but they may have cannabis in Schedule 1, or they may have medical marijuana in their state.
Oh yeah,
but they haven't,
it's an alternative. It's basically saying we're going to let you use marijuana, and it's not safe for medical use, and it's not safe for for use under medical supervision, but we're going to let you decide for yourself whether you think it's good for you, but it's not approved, so you use it at your own risk. There's no guarantee that it will work. We're telling you it's not safe, all these different things, but we're going to let you use it. So it's the authorization of something outside the context of the Controlled Substances Act, saying it's an exception. So the state has created an exception to the Controlled Substances Act because it doesn't fit in the Controlled Substances Act. That's what the federal exemption would do, the same exact thing. It would say, this is exempt. All that other stuff does not apply. And we're not approving, we're not saying this is good for anything. You decide that. We're going to let you decide. If you think it's good for you, you go ahead and use it. We're saying we don't think it's good for anything, but we're going to stay out of it. It's like medical necessity in a way, or it's like, so it's an exception. And in the international treaties, you've got medical use, scientific use, horticultural use, industrial use, and then you've got domestic law. It says, and constitutional law. That's not medical use. It's not scientific use. It's not horticultural. It's not industrial. It's other, and it's covered. The treaty allows for that. So there's no way that you can say that what you're doing is not okay, but you have to identify why it's okay and use those sections of the treaty to say, this is what we're doing. We're not confused about it. We know what we're doing. These are our rights. And that's what's not happening. We're not seeing the states say they have a right to do this under federal and international law, and they do. But they won't say it. And the same thing, like when you see Portugal or Jamaica or something change their laws, they need to tell the UN, we're doing this pursuant to the UN treaty. This is a section of the treaty that allows us to do this. We're filing a declaration with the International Narcotics Control Board explaining what we're doing so that you know that we're not just giving you the finger and saying we don't like law and order or something. I mean, so yeah. Yeah, there's a way to do this, but people are not passionate enough about this to care. And it's like, well, who's being injured by this? Well, people who can't defend themselves, right? I mean, you know, was a person that's on this program's got a debilitating medical condition, what are they going to do? Sue the DEA? Like, where do they get the wherewithal to do that? So I have the wherewithal to do that, and I'm doing that. And I'm doing it out in the open and in full cooperation with our Department of Public Health. And they know why I'm doing it, because I can, and I'm healthy. So I can stay focused.
Well, you keep doing what you're doing, because that voodoo that you do is working. Wade has a follow-up as well.
I'm going to try and keep it brief. I feel like the stigma, if you will, that was created by Prohibition and then the Controlled Substances Act around cannabis is really kind of the crux of this. And I want to see the laws change. I mean, one of our tagline, the Veterans Action Council, is access for all. That's our goal.
Sure.
This plant is not harmful, but there's all this residual craziness in the laws that exist now. And I guess as someone who uses cannabis every day myself and have for many years, and I'm of similar age to yourself, Carl, I can't get my head around not using for 30 years. Deep respect for your willingness to do it, because it gives you that platform to stand on, that it's part of your religious sacrament, but you're passing on it because you don't want to go back to prison and you want to be able to say, I'm not committing a crime, you guys are. At what point do you think you might finally be able to smoke a joint again, man? What's that going to look like for you, Carl?
Well, first of all, let me just go back to the example with the Department of Health in Hawaii saying we're ashamed of this and we're not going to stand up for it and defend it. So that's the stigma part of it, okay? In Iowa, I've shown our Department of Health that there's a way to go forward, and they're owning it. I mean, reluctantly, but they are owning it. I have a written declaration from them saying Carl Olsen is right. The only way to settle this is to get a federal exemption. So basically, I've dragged them kicking and screaming to saying, we're not ashamed. We know what we're doing. We're proud of it, and it's the right thing to do. So that's the stigma part of it. As far as smoking cannabis, the Department of Health just filed their brief on July 8th opposing my application for a religious registration in the program, saying that it's not my religious practice to use cannabis extract, that my religion requires smoking cannabis. And so I'm saying, well, yeah, but my religion doesn't require abstinence either, and you're telling me I can't use anything. So cannabis extract would be better than nothing. So, stop the bullshit. But then I'm saying, well, like last year we lifted the THC cap on it. So the program is not what it was 2 years ago. It keeps getting more and more inclusive, and there was a bill introduced just this year by 3 Republicans to add 3 ounces of combustible raw cannabis to our program, and Minnesota just did that. So why would I wait until they create combustible raw cannabis to apply to get on the program? I want on now, and then I won't have to. And not only that, if I applied for it after they add smokable cannabis to it, they'll still try to say I can't have it. So I see myself being in the same boat as 10,000 Iowans on this program, and we will all rise or sink together, and I am with them, and my use will be the same as theirs. and it will track that way. Whatever they can do, I can do. That's the argument that we have in court right now. So I can't answer your question, but I can tell you that that's the direction that I'm going.
Well, we hope you can self-realize that sooner rather than later as well.
I smoked cannabis for 20 years, so I still remember what it's like. I want to do that. Yeah, it's still good, I bet.
Councilmember Lane.
Yeah, I was just going to comment earlier. Carl was on how the state, like Louisiana, we have the state, the ag department was running the cannabis program, but the state acknowledged cannabis as medicinal. They have 2 state universities, LSU and Southern University, using contractors to grow cannabis. And yet this year we passed a law to have the Department of Health regulate the cannabis program. But yet the Department of Health is in control of our Controlled Substance Act in Louisiana, and they have cannabis listed as Schedule 1. So there's a conflict there. If you're going to regulate the health program, cannabis program, and go out there and check, testing and all this other stuff, then you've got to acknowledge that the cannabis is medicinal, it has some medicinal value.
Well, it could have medicinal value in the same way that a proper diet would have, but it wouldn't be prescription. And all the schedules are prescriptions. All 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is all prescription. So I don't want cannabis to be rescheduled. I want it to be descheduled. Right. And so I don't see a conflict there. I see this as being an alternative medicine. I don't want it to be an FDA approved prescription. And not only that, how many FDA approved prescriptions for plants are there? It doesn't exist. It'll never happen. So I think this is a medicine that you can grow in your garden, and there's no place for it in the Controlled Substances Act. But an exemption would take care of that right away. It would not be permanent. Exemptions can be revoked, so it wouldn't be permanent. It would be a step toward everybody realizing that we need to come up with a permanent solution to this, which is descheduling and coming up with, safety regulations like we regulate food or something. It's not prescription, but it can't have contaminants in it. It has to be standards that it has to be acceptably grown and packaged and that kind of regulations.
Right. Yeah. Just minimal.
Unless you're growing your own.
Safety regulations on, consumer safety.
Yeah.
That's the bare minimum. That's all we need. I think there's a space, a parallel marketplace for like farmers markets. We have people selling vegetables at farmers markets. We're not out there testing them for pesticide or anything every morning when
right.
We should be able to have.
It would be like that. Yeah, it would be regulated, but not to death. Homegrown would not be regulated, and it would be when you get into the commercial aspect of it. And in my church, we weren't into the commercial aspect of it. It was like we all used it, and we had to have a ton of it around, and you would share it, and so it wasn't like we were selling it to each other. So.
Yeah, and the farmers market model would be if you had some, like the head of the farmers market, you go by and show them what you have. You can only bring in a certain amount, and once you sell that there, that's it. It's not like somebody could go in and with a truckload of it. It'd just be a mainly.
But anyway, your Department of Public Health can keep marijuana in Schedule 1 and give an exemption, which is an interim solution to lead to taking it completely out of the schedules. It can be in the schedules as long as an exemption exists for it. That makes the schedules don't apply to that.
Yeah.
So, and then if you get enough of that, eventually the Schedule 1 will be like, well, it's not doing anything. Why do we leave it in Schedule 1? We're not even applying Schedule 1 to it anymore. So the exemption would lead to the eventual repeal of that nonsense. And that's how you could tolerate leaving marijuana in Schedule 1. As long as you have an exemption, that nullifies the effect of Schedule 1. and that can just hold for the future and get fixed later. And of
So
course,
that,
all these bad things that are supposed to happen are not going to happen. So the evidence just keeps piling up that it's not dangerous and it's not harmful.
so the exemption would come from the federal government to the state, the health department, or the health
Yeah,
department?
because when the state sets up a program, like you said, that seems so inconsistent with the scheduling, what they've done is created an exemption at the state level, but they haven't used their
Applied it.
thinking cap and thought, well, hey, maybe we need a federal exemption, and maybe the international treaty has an exemption in there. They're not putting all the pieces together. There's nothing. I mean, this is not just a local matter, it's an international thing. So, but the international controls all have these escape valves in them. And so when the state creates an exemption, they've already started that escape valve process. So for them not to look for the federal exemption or the international exemption is batshit crazy. So that's the problem. And of course, in Hawaii, they didn't hear about this exemption argument until they were 20 years into their program, right? Because they did this in 2000, the year 2000. I was in at the ground level in Iowa. I had this argument prepared before we even enacted our medical marijuana law. So I carefully grafted it into the conversation the whole entire time from the get-go. I didn't come in 20 years after the mess was created and everybody was in their, positions and locked in stone where they can't change their way of thinking. I was able to manipulate this while they were still thinking and hadn't solidified their thinking on it yet. So I was able to get in there and help them see this the way I see it. And I've been very successful at that. And of course they're reluctant because Iowa is looking around going, well, no other states are doing this. Why should we do it? And I'm going, well, because I live here.
Well, thank you. That helped me kind of get some direction in Louisiana, what I should ask for. I'll email the Department of Health, Secretary of Department of Health, and try and get some response.
Yeah, characterize what you have in your state as the state creating an exception to the Controlled Substances Act, an exception from the scheduling, and then explain how that same process works at the federal level. But first, you have to get them to buy into, we've already done this.
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing. And we're committed to that. That's the road forward. And then you say, okay, well, that's the same road at the federal level and international level.
Thank you, Carl.
Yep.
Councilmember Landau, you have a question.
Yes. First of all, thank you so much for all the hard work and all the sacrifices you've made to pave the way. I was wondering, I watched a documentary in 2015. I don't remember the name, but there was a guy that they interviewed that he says he's one of 3 people that has a religious exemption, at least at the time, from the federal government. I know there was a bunch of cannabis churches in California, but they were all ended up selling. So they all got cracked down and shut down at a point. To your knowledge, did the federal government actually ever exempt cannabis for religious use anywhere in the US?
Only on a very limited basis. There was a guy who was told he couldn't use cannabis on parole in Oregon, Valray, and the court removed that restriction on him because he was a Rastafarian. There was a group in, can't remember, Idaho or somewhere, Bauer, where they got arrested for large scale, and the court said they could make an argument for personal use based on Rastafarianism, but they never did come back and make that argument because that would be a small thing if you're facing distribution and felony charges and they won't let you apply the religious exemption argument to that. There's Dan Quaintance down in Arizona lost his case. Roger Christie lost his case in Hawaii. God, on and on and on. Michael Mooney in Hawaii. So not really. Now the ayahuasca has been found to be protected. The UDV church in New Mexico, they were receiving ayahuasca, a tea with DMT in it, which is Schedule 1, from Brazil, and the DEA seized their sacrament at the post office, and they were able to get that back, and the US Supreme Court said that was exempt from federal drug law. But they don't actually have an exemption from the DEA, so we don't know if they got arrested in some other context, would that case protect them in some other context? Like, so no, this is the peyote exemption is the only solid one. And of course, that peyote comes from Texas, and the Texas distributors are licensed in Texas, and they're licensed at the federal level. So there's nothing else like it. These new licenses for bulk manufacturer for people like MedFarm, which is the grower here in Iowa, start to bring that more into the realm of possibility for marijuana, where you could make a complete argument end to end. This is where I'm going to get the marijuana from, and this is how I'm going to use it. And you don't leave all these open things where the government can't figure out what you're doing, you know? I mean, if you want the government to give you a license, you have to tell them what you're doing, you know? And I know if I don't do that, I'll end up in prison again. So I don't have a whole lot of choice here. Yeah.
Right on. Council members, do y'all have any follow-up questions? We've kind of gone through our orchestrated ones. Just wondering before we kind of wrap up if anybody had any follow-ups. Dun, 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 dun. All right. Carl, is there anything that you would like to say or promote, or any type of legislation that you're working on or toward that you would like to speak on?
Oh, I didn't mention this, but I filed a petition with the DEA for an exemption for our state program in January well, we started over-the-counter sales in December of 2018. And I wanted to file a petition to exempt that activity in November of 2018, but my attorney dragged his feet and didn't get it filed until January of 2019. So then after I filed that petition with the DEA, I went and presented that to the board that regulates our program here in Iowa and showed it to them and asked them if this whole thing was an illegal enterprise under federal law. And they said it was. And I said, if there was a way to fix this, should we? And they said it was. And so I said, well, I've already got the petition filed with the DEA. I just want you to help me with it. Well, they don't quite work that way. So they decided they agreed with me, but they decided they needed to file their own, that they couldn't somehow get involved in my personal, a private citizen just doing this. And so that petition is still pending with the DEA. So when I said that when the state filed for these federal funding guarantees and then said the only way to get federal funding guarantees was federal exemption, I sent all that paperwork to the DEA and said, hey, I already have a petition with you pending on this topic, and here's the support from the state government saying that I'm absolutely right. So that gives you a little bit more context. The DEA has been sitting on this for quite some time and is accumulating quite a bit of evidence here that this is not your usual ordinary application. This guy actually got the state government to support what he was doing after he filed the thing. And I just don't think they could have imagined that that would happen. And I haven't messed with them on it because I don't have standing. I'm not enrolled in the program. So that's the religious argument, that I want to be enrolled in the program for religious reasons. That would give me standing in the other case to say I want this program I'm enrolled in to be protected. So it all dovetails and fits together like that. I need standing, and the only way I can get it is my religious argument. I can't come up with some phony medical condition argument. So
you explore that option and see where it takes you. Is there any way anyone who's watching can support you and your work and what you're doing? Do you have
that's a great question.
A website also as well, so if they want to learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, carl-olsen.com is my website. And it's Olsen. CARL-OLSEN.com. And yeah, so basically there shouldn't be a state government that reinvents the wheel here. The wheel has been invented and the wheel is rolling. So now the argument would be to join. So the state would say, well, this Olsen guy in the state of Iowa are bringing up this issue and we're involved in it somehow. There's 47 states that have these programs that are inconsistent with federal drug law. So they would all have an interest in the outcome of this federal petition with the DEA. In other words, if Iowa got an exemption, these other 47 states, or well, 46, Iowa's one of the 47, whatever it is, it's unbelievable. It's like all but one or two states anyway. They all have the same exact situation. And so they should say, hey, I want to have a say in this. It's a federal thing. And of course the DEA, well, anyway, so that's what I'm saying is like, and let's say California says, okay, well, we want to get into it. Well, California's got a much more expansive program than Iowa's got. Iowa doesn't even have raw cannabis. So if Iowa goes to the DEA and says, give us exemption like the one for peyote because we have zero diversion and zero adverse health impacts. We track our marijuana seed to sale. We know where every bit of it goes. We haven't had any diversion or any adverse health impacts in the 2 years or how many years, 4 years the program has been in operation. How is California going to make that argument? It's not the same. They would have to argue based on the facts in California. But what if a state looked at Iowa and said, well, we can set up a program like that? Well, the DEA basically isn't going to hassle people for homegrown. And they're not paying this crazy federal tax penalty, 26 USC 280E. So the cost of the business expenses that can't be deducted from the large cannabis facilities and is passed on to the consumer, the homegrown makes it much cheaper. So the state could say, we're going to set up a highly regulated extract program and we want a DEA exemption for that. We won't worry about the homegrown. We don't need an exemption for that. Or they could say, we want that exempt too and fight that fight. Iowa can't help with that because we don't have that. But there's no reason the state couldn't argue for the whole enchilada. I mean, nobody's even trying this. It's a shame. So anyway, that's how people could help. That way you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can just say, hey, Iowa's already doing this. We need to support Iowa and don't let them hang because we're all hang together. So yeah.
Well, needless to say, I can't thank you enough, Carl, for joining us tonight. I think George has a follow-up.
Yeah, just kind of tying into what you just finished up with, Carl. Is there any state that you think that their current program would fit into an exemption? Is there that you're aware of?
There must be, I don't know how many states had these low THC programs like Iowa had. We just took the THC cap off and set it to a gram limit instead of a percent, and that we had a 3% by volume, but no limit on how much product you could buy. So you could theoretically buy all the THC you wanted. It would just be diluted to 3%. So now we went to a 4.5 grams per 90 days, but they can sell 100% pure THC product now. So any state, there must be like a dozen states that have programs more restrictive than Iowa. And I would imagine that they don't have any diversion or any adverse health impacts. So they could immediately say, if Iowa gets one of these, we're a shoo-in. We would just get one automatically. It's the states that have programs that are more expansive than Iowa, like Minnesota, Illinois, Missouri, South Dakota. The states surrounding Iowa have much more like raw flower. So their argument would be a little bit more substantial. The DEA might say, we don't think your program is run as well as Iowa, but that would be subjective. I mean, who says it's not? The DEA or Does the state think their program is not well run? I mean, like, what the hell? So I don't know exactly, but yeah, there's some states that could just pick this up immediately. Now, assuming Iowa wins, you know, if we win something, I think several states could just immediately benefit from that. The ones with more restrictive programs.
Well, thank you very much, Carl, and I'd like to thank all of our council members for joining us. Pearson had to jump off. Gage, Al, Nate, Wade, Mike, Tony, George, myself, Etienne. Carl, thank you so much for doing the work that you've done and making us and our audience a little bit aware of the hard work as well as your constant dedication to moving the needle on cannabis, especially in the state of Iowa. So,
you know, one last thing I wanted to say was Nancy Mace has got a fairly decent bill, and she's also got one for international, taking marijuana out of the single convention. So I think she's pretty bright.
we are actually in contact with her office. So yes,
Yeah.
we have we are being very strategic in putting ourselves and placing ourselves at the table, because if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right?
Yeah. Schumer's bill is kind of weird. I mean, 25% excise tax and expungement for juveniles only. And
they talked about that last year, and we told them, pardon me, 2 years ago, that that was a no-go. Well, 3 years, Jesus, like 2019.
Obviously, he's pandering to the Republicans because he needs their votes. But
well, you also have to understand that 280E, they're making over $4 billion a year, and they've got to figure out how to balance where that's going to come from.
Oh, I didn't know it was I didn't know that was a significant factor in the negotiations. But
well, that amount of money will kind of make it quite significant, because right now we are low-hanging fruit. I'm in the midst of a settlement for Berkeley Patients Group.
Oh, okay.
Going into our 23rd year, in October, so everybody is being hit systematically because it's low-hanging fruit. So yes, descheduling, but is something that we want to see besides a rescheduling.
Now, if they issue an exemption, there's no tax. So think about that. If the state got an exemption and then they tried to go from there to like, oh, well, now we're going to do a 25% excise tax. I mean, the exemption would completely eliminate 26 USC 280E, gone. No tax, tax-free. And then they would come in and try to impose a 25% excise tax on top of no tax. So yeah, they're going to fight this exemption thing for what you just said.
Oh yeah, well, I was the test case for the state of California for taxation on medical cannabis, so I'm well aware of the realities, and they basically told me to sit down, shut up, sit in the corner, and take it, which is basically I had to do, and I had to go do an offer and compromise in the end, but that's the reality of the tax man when they want money.
Well, I really want
Al?
this exemption, hands off.
Yep. Al, you had a follow-up?
Well, I think the thing that I took away from this federal discussion over the last 2 days or so is that they are actually considering taking cannabis out of the schedule system. I think that's remarkable.
Yeah,
we've discussed we've discussed in past conversations, like, what would our minimum be? 3, 4. Well, all of the faults, Carl, in that bill would be overcome. My objectives would be overcome if they descheduled it, because then the gloves are off and capitalism would take over and the whole thing would be over. But I'm sort of heartened by the fact, again, that they're discussing no schedule. They're going to treat it like a plant.
Oh yeah, no, I like that. Yeah.
Well, that's the thought, anyways.
Yeah, that's the thought. Yes. Yep.
All righty. Well, thank you very much. Thank everybody for coming. Carl, again, you're just amazing human. So keep up doing what you're doing. We appreciate you. I would like to check in with you again in the future to see your progress, but also thank you for giving us all little tips and our little 10th Amendment realities of little loopholes that we can look to exploit so that we can continue to keep chipping at this wall of prohibition so that we can finally all sit in a room together and pass that joint over to Carl.
Yeah, the 10th Amendment would be that exemption, yes. Absolutely. Because it's not the Commerce Clause argument that lost in Rage, so.
Yep, absolutely.
And they said she didn't exhaust her administrative remedies, and they said scheduling was an administrative remedy. Well, exemption is another administrative remedy. They didn't even mention it. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Now, was that a feint, or was that, on purpose,
Oh, I'm sure it never occurred to them. Nobody brought it up. The federal government brought up the scheduling thing, saying she should apply for scheduling. So that was actually an argument, but nobody said a word about exemption, but that is a federal administrative remedy.
Right. That was the lawyers missing that one, unfortunately.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Not the first time.
The government lies to you by not telling you things.
Yes.
Right.
We all us veterans found that out for the first time via our recruiters, right, gentlemen? Well, thank you, Carl, for joining us tonight. This is our V.A.C. Roundtable number 40. Carl Olsen, you just keep up doing what you're doing, and we're going to keep doing what we do. We're actually going to Washington, D.C. in September for a lobby day, so we're going to be doing what we can to push the veterans issues forward. And thank you for your guidance, your mentorship, as well as your stewardship, because what you are doing and continue to do enlightens others, that give them an awareness that there is someone holding up a light in the darkness for them to see, and that person for these many decades has been you. So we do hope that you are fostering and finding someone, just in case your arm gets too tired, holding that.
My attorney is really into this. He's awesome. Yes. He is and he's younger than I am, so he'll outlast me. Yeah.
Right on. So
the bases are loaded and I'm up to bat. So get ready.
Right on. Well, hit it out of the park, my friend.
Yep.
And I look forward to a day when we can actually share smoke together. And I look forward to that day and that time. So thank you, everybody, for joining us for our V.A.C. Roundtable number 40. Carl,
thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The opinions of the individuals during this broadcast are their own, and may not be the opinions of their group or other organizations they may be involved with. All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
When you have a pain that's reached its peak, Legacy for 20, it's so unique. If organic cannabis is what you seek, here's your trusted partner 7 days a week. Suppository salves, vapes and drops, topicals, edibles, infused pop. Just when life seems like it ain't easy, at Legacy 420, enjoy a pop freezy. Lab tested products, make them the GOAT. Legacy 420 out on your road. Legacy 420 in Tyndonega Mohawk territory. Indigenous organic cannabis at its finest.
Enjoy the buzz of legalization with Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. From lights to plant nutrients, books, consumption accessories, and more, we've got all your basics to grow or consume cannabis. Visit our info center or take a look at our piercing services and body jewelry, now available in-store through Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, 17 Bridge Street West, Campbellford.
Limestone City Hydroponics is Kingston, Ontario's hydroponics shop. Take your growing to the next level and create the optimal environment with a tent kit, or maximize your yield with an ebb and flow flood table kit. Either way, Limestone City Hydroponics has more sizes and options to fit your needs. Are you looking for the power of the sun that adapts to your budget? Then look no further, as they have professional grow lighting. They have indoor grow systems that are easy and cost effective, with many options to fit your living space and lifestyle. Cultivate your growing potential. We have everything you need to succeed. And if you can't make it to the store, they offer local delivery to the greater Kingston area. Remember, when you're looking for experts to help you grow, then look no further than the locally owned Limestone City Hydroponics, 105 Sunderland Drive in Kingston, Ontario. Call them at 613-548-0420.
We are people advocating cannabis education here at paceradio.net.